Hello, I'm Regid Ahmed with BBC World News. Our top stories. An explosion targets the seat of Egypt's Christian community. 26 people are dead in the attack. The moment bombs go off outside a football stadium in Istanbul, killing 38 people. The government vows revenge. Italy's Foreign Minister Paolo Gentiloni is named as the country's new Prime Minister. And as the Brazilian football season ends, fans and players remember the Chapecoense team. Hello and welcome. It's one of the worst ever attacks against Egypt's Coptic Christian minority. 26 people killed and dozens wounded by a bomb during Sunday Mass at a chapel next to the city's St. Mark's Cathedral. Most of the victims were women and children who were seated together at the service. It's not immediately clear who carried out the attack, but Egypt has seen a wave of attacks by Islamic militants since the overthrow of President Morsi. Richard Galpin has the latest. And we will be speaking to the BBC's Salil Nabil, who is in Cairo a little later on the programme. Turkey's Interior Minister has vowed vengeance after 38 people, most of them police officers, were killed in two explosions in the heart of Istanbul. The attack is believed to have involved at least one suicide bomber. It happened just hours after the end of a football match at the Besiktas Stadium, not far from Taksim Square. Another blast happened at Maka Park, which is close by. Mark Lowen reports from Istanbul. Well, this is just the latest in a series of attacks in Turkey this year, blamed either on Kurdish militants or so-called Islamic State. In February, 28 people were killed in an attack on a military convoy in the capital, Ankara. In March, 37 people were killed by Kurdish militants in a suicide car bombing in Ankara. And in June, a gun and bomb attack on Ataturk International Airport in Istanbul killed 41 people, and this attack was blamed on IS militants. In July, 35 Kurdish fighters who tried to storm a military base were killed by the Turkish army. And in August, 30 people died in an attack on a wedding party in the southern city of Gaziantep. IS is suspected to have carried out this attack. Well, with me is İrem Koka of the BBC's Turkish service. Now, first of all, the government has blamed the PKK, but does it have the hallmarks of a PKK attack?
Well, the government officials, including the Prime Minister himself, Deputy Prime Minister and Interior Minister, they all underlined the initial investigation in the twin attacks yesterday carry the signs that PKK has carried out the attack. But particularly in the last 18 months, Turkey has been target of similar attacks, bomb attacks and suicide bomber attacks, both by PKK as well as the so-called Islamic State. So at this stage, the government blames the PKK, but so far no one has claimed the responsibility of the attacks.
What do we expect the government to do now?
In the past, we had seen when the government blames PKK, the Kurdish militants, they carry out airstrikes to PKK strongholds in northern Iraq as well as northern Syria. So we might see the Turkish government to do the similar airstrikes to PKK militants. But at the same time, the Interior Minister has said there's a wide investigation going on, and so far 13 people are detained as part of the investigation open for the attacks of last night.
If this certainly was the PKK, why might this attack have come at this time? Is it because of growing, sort of focusing in on pro-PKK lawmakers, those sorts of things that we're seeing? Maybe it's important to note that, as I said, for the last 18 months we had seen similar attacks targeting Turkey, but this is the largest attack that has happened so far since the coup attempt in mid-July. And given the timing, it is we know in this particular attack, it is about 2 hours after the game ended, which was a very important game for the Turkish league. So there were thousands of people in the stadium. But
it was after everyone left the stadium, and this, what we know so far, it specifically targeted the security forces. So in the last a month or so, there's a growing tension between the Kurdish political movement in Turkey and the government. As we know, there are more than a dozen Kurdish politicians, members of parliaments, are now in prison.
Irem Koka from the BBC's Turkish service, thank you very much for your time. In other news, independent monitors say the Islamic State has recaptured the city of Palmyra, despite attempts by Russian warplanes to stop them. Palmyra, home to ancient ruins, was first held by IS last year before the militants were driven out. Russia, though, says it will defend the city. A car bomb has killed 16 people near the port of Mogadishu in Somalia. Witnesses say the attacker was a suicide bomber. Most of the victims are thought to be port workers and police officers. The militant group Al-Shabaab said it carried out the attack. Police say more than 30 people have been killed in Kenya when a fuel tanker crashed on one of the country's busiest roads. Kenyan officials said the tanker lost control, descending a steep hill on the road between the capital Nairobi and Naivasha. It veered into the oncoming traffic and exploded, causing a pile-up and blaze involving 11 other vehicles. The Italian Foreign Minister Paolo Gentiloni has been asked to form a government. Mr. Gentiloni, who's 62, said he realised the urgency of forming a new government to reassure Italy's citizens and allies. Now the BBC's James Reynolds is in Rome. First of all, James, can he form a new government?
He's going to hold talks to do so. I would imagine that the fact that he's been asked to form a government means that he will form a government. The party that he represents, the Democratic Party, does have the largest number of seats in Parliament, and it has formed a coalition over the last few years since the 2013 election. So I think he will form a government. I think the more potent question is this: how much clout, how much power will he get to have in this government, and how long will he last?
There's talk of a banking crisis. Do you think he'll be able to do something about that?
Well, I think that's the first thing really in his inbox on Monday morning. He'll look at the markets, and I think the markets will look at him and say, how safe are Italy's banks? Bear in mind, a number of them are struggling with lots and lots of bad debt. There's one particular bank, Monte dei Paschi di Siena, which has to have a rescue deal by the end of the year. I think that will be Mr. Gentiloni's first priority, to get the banks in order, perhaps to reassure Europe as well. But I think there's one thing that Europe will look at, and that is this. They know who he is. He's been the foreign minister for the last 2 years. He's been speaking to European leaders on and off. In other words, he's not a new figure on the international stage. But again, it goes back to how much power will he have, given that Italy may face elections in 14 months' time.
Does he have a role in terms of bringing the country together post the referendum, which was relatively divisive?
I think he does, but that might be a limited role for the fact that people will already be looking beyond him. They will be looking to that next election, the first test to see how far the populist five-star movement, which was one of the no voices, how far that five-star movement may get towards victory in the next election. Mr. Gentiloni will have to fight for relevance. Bear in mind, the outgoing Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, still wants to play a powerful role in Italian politics. So I think it will be a struggle for Mr. Gentiloni to attract everyone's attention over what may be 14 months or less in power.
James Reynolds in Rome, thank you very much. Donald Trump has held a second round of talks with the chief executive of ExxonMobil as speculation mounts that he could name Rex Tillerson as his Secretary of State. If chosen, Mr. Tillerson's business connections will come under close scrutiny, as will his relations with Russia. But what do we know about those ties to Russia? Mr. Tillerson met Russian President Vladimir Putin in the late 90s while working on an Exxon project on Russia's Sakhalin Island. In 2013, the Kremlin awarded Mr. Tillerson an Order of Friendship, and the longtime oil executive has previously criticised international sanctions against Russia for annexing Crimea. Donald Trump has been defending his interest in Mr. Tillerson in an interview with Fox News. Donald Trump there. Well, stay with us on BBC News, still to come. The latest from Nigeria, where at least 160 people are feared dead after a church roof collapsed. This is BBC World News. I'm Regid Ahmed. The latest headlines. At least 26 people have been killed in an explosion on the premises of the main Coptic Christian cathedral in Cairo. Let's get the latest on the attacks. The BBC's Sally Nabil is in Cairo. First of all, Sally, what more can you tell us? Not sure if we've got Sally Nabil, but we will try and come back to her when we can. Let's move on. Reports say the number of dead from a church collapse in southeastern Nigeria has risen to at least 160. Hospital chiefs say they expect that number to rise still further. The disaster happened in Uyo, the capital of Akwa Ibom State. Witnesses say the church was still under construction and workers had rushed to get it ready for the ceremony. Our Nigeria correspondent Martin Patience has more. Voting is underway in Hong Kong to select members of the election committee who will choose the territory's next leader. Only 6% of Hong Kong's voters can take part in the election, and those who are allowed to vote are seen as mostly sympathetic to China. And the vote is widely criticised as undemocratic, but pro-democracy groups are putting forward more candidates than ever before. Hong Kong's current leader, CY Leung, has announced he won't seek re-election after his term ends in July. Well, the polls are due to close in just under 2 hours' time. For more, I'm joined by Helia Chung from our Hong Kong studio. Helia, first of all, what can you tell us about how the election's been proceeding?
Well, these elections are important, but they are controversial since they're viewed as undemocratic. But there are two interesting things about the election this time round. First of all, as you say, pro-democracy groups are fielding an unprecedented number of candidates. In the past, many pro-democracy candidates didn't want to take part because they felt the system was undemocratic and they called it rigged. But this time round, they want to get at least 300 seats. That's a quarter of the seats in the entire election committee, because they want to try and have some negotiating powers to decide who Hong Kong's next leader is. The other interesting thing is the turnout, because we still have about 2 hours to go before polls close, but we've already broken the turnout record of last time. It's about 10% higher, and it's not clear exactly what this will mean, but some analysts think that this will benefit the pro-democracy camp if more people who weren't interested in the process before are casting their votes this time.
Helia, CY Leung has said he's not going to continue as chief executive, but he was very close to China. Who could be the new chief executive, and could it change Hong Kong's relationship to Beijing?
Who is going to be the next chief executive? Well, that's a question on everyone's mind ever since CY Leung's surprise announcement on Friday. Only one person has announced that he plans to run so far, and that's a retired judge, Wu Kwok-hing, who doesn't have any previous political experience, although that's why some of his supporters like him. One person who says she's thinking about running is Carrie Lam. She's the chief secretary, so she's very much seen as CY Leung's number two. So CY Leung's supporters are happy with that, although obviously his opponents aren't as happy. There's another woman who also say she's thinking of running. That's Regina Ip, and she's famous because she was Hong Kong's security minister back in 2003 when the government tried to implement a really controversial national security law. But that was so unpopular that 500,000 people took to the streets demanding it be shelved and demanding she step down. So she has her supporters, but she's a controversial figure. And the final person with potentially their hat in the ring is John Tsang, the current finance minister. He's considered more popular than CY Leung, but he did get in trouble last week because he was in Parliament and he refused to answer questions from 4 pro-democracy legislators who the government is trying to disqualify. So whoever does come into power in the end, they won't be able to really get enough votes unless Beijing supports them. And of course, they won't. Hong Kongers may not support them because they'll say you're not democratically elected. Why should we support you?
Helia Chung in Hong Kong, thank you very much for your time. Well, let's go back to the situation in Egypt now, where 25 people have been killed in an explosion in the premises of the main Coptic Christian cathedral in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Now, we do have Sally Nabil on the line for us in Cairo. Sally, first of all, can you give us an update on the situation?
I'm now outside the church where the explosion took place this morning, and I can see hundreds of angry men gathering outside protesting. They were raising signs that say no to terrorism, no to sectarianism. They were also blaming police forces for not doing enough to protect their houses of worship. Dead bodies and the wounded have been moved to nearby hospitals. We understand that some of these hospitals have asked people to donate blood so they can save the victims' lives. We also know that most of the victims are women. According to security sources, a woman walked in and planted a bomb inside the hole in the area specified for women worshippers, and this explains why most of the victims are women. It's hard to tell at the moment who carried out this attack, but we also understand that the prosecutor general has already started an investigation, and this is one of the biggest attacks to be directed against the Christian community in years, actually. Just after the ouster of Islamist President Mohammed Morsi 3 years ago, a lot of Christians were targeted, as well as churches. But over the past 3 years, it was relatively quiet, especially when it comes to targeting Christian community in Egypt.
Sally Nabil in Cairo, thank you very much. The Brazilian football season draws to a close today, but amid the usual colour and celebrations, one stadium will remain silent. Chapecoense, which lost most of its players in a plane crash last month, should have been playing Atletico Mineiro. Investigations are still trying to establish why the plane had no fuel when it crashed. Our correspondent Weira Davis reports. And just a reminder of our top story: an explosion targets the seat of Egypt's Christian community. 26 people are dead in the attack. Much more on our website, bbc.com/news. You can get a lot of analysis there, the top pictures and video of all our top stories as well. You can also find me and most of the team on Twitter. I'm @Regid Ahmed. See you soon.